What's up, witches? I'm coming to you today to shoot a video because a viewer of mine by the handle of Ellen Felis or Phyllis 3370 has asked me recently a couple of really thoughtful questions, and they are so deep and thoughtful that I am left to choose between writing an essay or shooting a video. So you know what I choose. Much easier. The question that she gave yesterday on my Pisces New Moon chart reading is, I would love to know your thoughts on tropical versus sidereal astrology. I really struggle thinking why the planets wouldn't affect us more in their actual place in the sky in this moment, opposed to where they show up on a paper graph. So, this is a deep question. I will try not to be too rambling about it, but let's just take it a little bit at a time. First of all, I guess we need to define the difference between tropical and sidereal astrology for those of you who don't know. Sidereal or Eastern or Vedic astrology puts the planets against the constellations that they are in, actually in the sky in real time. In centuries BC, I think the first one was 300 some BC, tropical astrology was created. And what that did was fix the point of the spring equinox, the vernal equinox, as 0 degrees Aries. Now, the way the Earth rotates, it doesn't spin like neatly on this axis. The axis kind of wobbles back and forth. And because of it, it kind of wobbles and moves backwards. The point of the vernal equinox moves backwards through the signs. And this is what creates the great ages. And it's actually where Vedic or sidereal astrology and tropical astrology kind of cross. Because tropical astrology acknowledges the great ages. So it takes about 2,000 years for that wobble to move us backwards through an entire sign. We are now in the Aquarian, or we are now in the Piscean age still. And in another 100 and some years, we will have wobbled back to the point where the spring equinox actually occurs at the end of the sign Aquarius. That starts the Aquarian age. So, tropical astrology, rather than going with that wobble and watching things, precess through the signs, tropical astrology set the point of the vernal equinox, so wherever the sun is at the point of the vernal equinox is denoted as 0 degrees Aries. So you have that information. The next piece of information that you need is that astrology is not a science. Astronomy is a science, a hard science based on empirical, factual evidence and measurements and that kind of stuff. Astrology is an art based in that science. So let's throw out astrology as a science. I don't know any professional astrologers that will claim it is a hard science. It's not. Kind of like psychology is not a hard science. It's a soft science. But we move astrology even further away from science and call it an art. It is the art of interpretation. So what astrology does, and there's a saying in astrology that the planets do not compel, which means they don't force us to do things. They don't cause. They don't compel. They describe. So when people talk about, and unfortunately, I have a very unfortunate habit of using causal language, like, this says that we will blah, 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 or, I use this causal language and it's not really valid. The planets don't cause us to behave in certain ways. What astrology has done is watch planetary movements over millennia and to observe the cycles that are going on up there and how those cycles are reflected down below. So it's reflective. Human beings are hardwired to find meaning in things. And I think we're the only ones that do it so far as we know. We don't know if animals apply meaning, but that could be argued, not going there. But we look for meaning in everything. And when we see things that correlate, we automatically apply meaning to it. So that's what astrology does, is it watches these movements and cycles, and it, based in long history, there have been consistent observations about what happens when things are in certain places, and we go with that. Astrology is only really accurate in hindsight. I do not look at astrology in a predictive way, although, gainsay myself immediately, you heard me talking about when Pluto goes into, when Pluto changes signs, expect big things, Historically, we have a track record of this. When certain things happen astrologically, we see other things reflected, even though we can't specifically, precisely predict. There's a range that we can predict. So it's more like a weather report than an exact prediction. When we look in the sky and see horsetail clouds, for instance, it is a harbinger of rain. It is a sign that says we can expect rain to come. Well, after thousands of years of observation, we can see when Pluto moves into a new sign, we can expect, although Pluto hasn't been observed for thousands of years, but we can expect when Mars does, XYZ, we can expect certain things within this range. Okay? Now, tropical versus sidereal. When I was trained in astrology, and I do want to make a comparison here to card divination. So the difference between astrology and card divination is that with cards, there's a randomization. We shuffle, and through the synchronicity principle, we lay out random selections of cards, and then we apply meaning to those cards, and we have found that that meaning is very much reflected by, our actual lived experience. But it's random. We shuffle, we throw, we trust, right? With astrology, it's not random. We are looking at precisely measured, because it is grounded in a science, we're looking at precisely measured positions and things that we can know, but then we're applying meaning to that. Now, just as some people, might have started their reading with a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and others start with a Thoth deck, and those have very different meanings in some cases. Whatever deck you start with, you kind of embed that meaning system, that symbol system, into your psyche, and it can be difficult to switch to a new system, and you can fall into this idea that one system is right and the other system is wrong. But overarching divination, whether it's tarot or astrology, is this rule of whatever works. I was trained in Western tropical astrology using the Placidus house system. There are so many, even within Western astrology, there are all these house systems. There's the equal house system, there's Koch, there's Placidus, there's Regiomantis, there's Porphyry, there's all different house systems. And I think astrologers tend to, whatever system they were trained in, to kind of stick with that system. I don't know, I'm sure there are cases where somebody started in astrology and a particular system hasn't quite worked and they've tried a different one and found it works better. So the same is with Vedic and, sidereal and tropical astrology. And your job, to save your sanity, not least of all, is to find a system that works for you and stick with it. And that last part is really important, because if you go between systems, you can end up confusing yourself, and you can end up kind of dismantling that system for yourself and taking away a valid tool that you could be using. I have found, and here's another example. There are, in my magical practice, the blade is the element of fire, represents the element of fire, and the wand represents the element of air. And I have big reasons about that. If you want to search my channel, you will find those reasons. But most tarot decks, that are based in the Rider-Waite-Smith system, look at swords as air and wands as fire. Now, I had a little bit of upheaval in the beginning, when I started reading cards, because I'd been doing astrology for much longer than cards. And I started confusing myself because of the disconnect there. I wanted swords to be fire and wands to be air, and there are some decks that are based in magic and witchcraft and paganism that have done that. But as far as your standard decks, I had to just step out of this system and into this system, because the systems work within themselves. You take it in its own context. So when I am reading tarot, I have kicked out that cognitive dissonance that happened for a while there, and this is the system I'm stepping into. Swords are air, wands are fire, and it works within that system. When I read a tarot deck, that system works. If I'm doing something magically, I might choose a different deck. But by the same token, whatever astrological system works for you, or when you're trying out astrological systems, you need to take it in its own context and not be comparing. I think that's what I'm trying to say here, is comparing systems might not get you anywhere. What you need to do is trial and error to see what works for you. Another example, I have my chart in the Placidus house system, and everything makes sense to me. There's one thing, and you can try. So I put my chart in the Placidus system, put my chart in the Koch system. When I switch systems, only one thing changes. One planet in my natal chart moves from one house to a different house. And I have found that an interesting thing to look at. But overall, Placidus works better for me than Koch. So I stick with the Koch system, except where Placidus is a system that has variable house sizes. So depending on where you are in latitude, you can have houses that are nearly equal, and depending on the time of year as well, where the houses are nearly equal. And then there are times where you've got these big gaping houses that even contain more than one sign, and then you have little tiny slivers of houses. And when you get to extreme northern and southern latitudes, it goes completely wonky. The Placidus house system breaks down, because you will get these gaping huge houses and tiny, where you've got like 3 different house cusps in one sign, which really throws a chart out of balance. So in that case, I go to, and this was based on research that I did, I go to an equal house system based on the position of the midheaven. But, there's that trial and error thing and finding what works. One of my exes was born in Alaska, and he's got that crazy ass houses when I do it in Placidus. So I did the equal house system based on the midheaven. Suddenly his chart made sense to me. Looking at his chart, otherwise there was like some things that made sense, but it was just too out of balance and out of whack, and I found that it broke down as a description. So when I switched the house system, it made much more sense, and it really did seem to give a valid description of his personality. So the bottom line here is that as an astrologer, you are practicing an art, and you need to find the tools that work best for you in that art. Okay, so not one or the other is valid. If it makes more sense to you that Vedic astrology, putting the planets where they actually are, that must be the truth, try it. Does it work? If it doesn't seem to, try a different house system. And, I can get very frustrated because there's some people doing this whole sign astrology, and to me that takes a step further out from even the Western system in placing things where they actually are. So, you can drive yourself insane, or you can just say, This is a subjective art, right? The difference between Another difference between cards and astrology is that with experience, card readers can apply their own meanings over time to certain cards. So you can have a card like, the death card, and you can look at it as an actual physical death. You can look at it as an ending. Some people have pushed that even farther and seen it as a beginning. So, put it in a really positive light. So you can do that, and you can apply. The court cards are the slipperiest. In astrology, the planets are what they are. There's a basic set of meanings that really don't change. Now, the set of meanings they're broad. There's a broad range, but Mars is Mars is Mars. You will never see Venus representing war and violence. That's Mars. Okay, so there are very more strict sets of keywords and meanings in astrology. It's a little bit tighter of a system in that regard, but the variety of systems themselves is pretty broad. So I would say, bottom line, whatever makes sense to you, this is where you've got to follow your own intellect and find what makes sense to you. So there's no right or wrong, and you do not get anywhere comparing systems except initially to find what works. Once you find what works, stick with it. Because if you start pulling in, well, this person says this and this one says that, you're just going to water down your own understanding and your own your own grounding. I'm searching for words here. This is fucked up. Okay. Your own confidence. That's the word. You're going to undermine your own confidence in the system. I hope that answers your question, Ellen. And I thank you for such a deep, thoughtful question. I'm going to link this video in the answer as the answer to your question. And you asked me another question that I'm going to shoot a video on too, but I have to figure out what my answer is, really. So I hope that helps, and have an excellent day, and I will see you later. This is Luna. Blessed be.